This is the Workplace Podcast with your host, William Corless. Brought to you in association with Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner. Each week we focus on a different aspect of the workplace. We hear from guest speakers who are subject matter experts and who are incredibly talented at what they do. These experts will give you a different perspective and insight to work life, with the aim of empowering you to take a different path to success in all aspects of work life. These perspectives will include career and personal success, leadership, high-performance teams, and creating a better work-life culture and organisation. Yellowwood, take a different path to success with your career, team, and organisation.
Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Joining us today to talk about her book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, is co-author Karen Hurt. Karen Hurt helps human-centered leaders find clarity in uncertainty, drive innovation, and achieve breakthrough results. She is the founder and CEO of Let's Grow Leaders, a global leadership development and training firm known for practical tools and leadership development programs that stick. She's the award-winning author of 5 books, no doubt, including Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates, and Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, which we will be talking about today, and host a popular Asking for a Friend vlog on LinkedIn. A former Verizon Wireless executive, Karen was named in Inc. magazine's list of great leadership speakers. Karen and her husband and business partner, David Dye, are committed to their philanthropic initiative, Winning Wells, building clean water wells for the people of Cambodia. Karen, you're very welcome to the Workplace Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am going to start with praise for this book. So we were talking about this earlier on. You noticed that I had done my research here, and inside of this cover, which you will see what I've written here, and I'll tell you what I've written. This book should be given out to every employee when they are doing their induction with every employee handbook. It is impactful, and here's why. It provides people with constructive language to navigate a wide range of workplace challenges. Now, I mean that. So this is what we're going to discuss in the podcast. It provides questions, and it's that disposition of curiosity when people are stuck in conflict. And I notice it just creates that movement and innovation, and as experts insights from many people, including one of our podcast guests, Marlene Chisholm. And it provides way to those inclusive conversations. It brings people together, and your peers and some who have been guests on this podcast give you very high praise. So Seth Godin said, a copy for every co-worker you interact with. Dory Clark, who's featured on this podcast, said, it's a must-have roadmap for courageous conversations at work. Karen Hurt and David Dye give you tools, techniques, and inspiration to turn stress and frustration into career-defining moments of leadership and innovation. Plus, Ralph Kilman, no less, famous for being one part of the Thomas Kilman instrument on conflict mode assessment, praised this, as well as Ken Blanchford. It deserves all the praise. What a body of work. Well done, Karen.
Oh, wow. Should we just stop here? Thank you so much. How lovely of you to share all of that. And you're just listening to this podcast, and you can't see what he's done, but he lifted up his book. It is like dog ear. There's like sticky notes everywhere. Before we close, I'm going to have to take a picture of that.
I work with people in the workplace all the time, high performance teams, matrix organizations. There's a lot of complexity. And conflict is hard in the workplace, isn't it?
It's hard, but I think it's getting harder because the workplaces are getting more complex. And I know you talk about this on your show because you've got more people working from home in hybrid teams. They're not necessarily building the connection that they once had. These matrix organizations, sometimes the goals are competing and you got competing priorities. And what we're also finding is in global teams, often people are working across different time zones. And I had one client who said, only 1 hour of the day that I can get my entire team together, that's a reasonable time. And the people in India are still joining us at 9 p.m. their time. So
wow,
makes it tricky.
Yeah. And that's the thing about this book. So I have to tell our listeners how it's structured. I was going to save it for the end, but to be honest, I can't wait. You have different practical approaches, understanding the world of work in different sections here. And the final three sections, then this is where you really get into of the different ways that we can navigate or the tackling tricky workplace situations. So, for example, if you feel overwhelmed, or how you need to say no to your boss, or competing priorities or conflicting goals, or if your team lacks accountability, or if your team doesn't get along, or a micromanager, or lazy coworkers, or chronic complainers, there are so many different ways that you can navigate these conversations. And there's over 30 chapters on this. I have to say to our listeners, if you haven't cottoned onto this, this is a must buy book. So, Karen, let's get into it. So, what I like about this book is you start off with the four dimensions of constructive conflict. Can you help us through that? What are the four dimensions? Conflict is just tears us apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that's it. So on one side, you have destructive conflict. That's conflict that we're not handling well. But conflict in itself is not bad. You need conflict to get to innovation. It's conflict is, you think this way, I think that way, you believe this, I believe that. If we can talk about that on the other side, is where you're going to see collaboration, innovation, all those aspects of really high performing teams. So when we talk about four dimensions, it starts with connection. We genuinely connected as human beings. And this really happens at two levels. One, are we connected as human beings before we need to have a difficult conversation? Because, imagine you're in a conflict, right, with a coworker, let's call him Joe, and Joe and you have a really nice relationship. He got you out of a jam the other day when your little kid was sick, and he told your boss how good you were at pivot tables. And then he comes to you and he says, hey, one of our greatest of all time powerful phrases, hey, I really care about you, and I am confident we can find a solution here. Well, you're like, right, Joe's a good guy. I'm confident about this too. Let's do this. Let's have this conversation. But, same conflict, different Joe. And Joe threw you under the bus the other day, and I don't trust him. And he comes to you and says, oh, I really care about you. I'm confident we can find a solution that we
Yeah.
can work with here. No, Joe, right? I don't trust you.
Mm.
So that's starting with the connection, but then it's how do we connect in any conversation? And it's, starting with the human elements here. So for Freitas, I just shared, hey, I really care about, and then you insert the thing that you actually care about, right? So
Yeah.
I really care about you, or maybe I really care about this project. I really care about the outcome. I really care about our customer. We care about looking good for our boss. We both want that. Whatever it is that you both care about. And I'm confident we can find a solution we can work with here. I mean, even as you and I were just chatting pre-show, right? I already
Yeah.
felt a little more connected to you, just knowing a little bit about how long you've
Yeah.
been in business, what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Before you jump into the work, just even
Mm.
5 minutes can make such a difference. So that's the first dimension.
Have clarity then, isn't it?
Yes. And so then there is clarity. And clarity is, do we have a shared understanding of success? Conflict comes from an expectation violation of some sort. And I mean, you know this better than anyone in your mediation work, right? I expect you to do this and you're doing that, and therefore we have conflict. So taking a moment to understanding that shared understanding of success. And one of my favorite, greatest of all time, GOAT's powerful phrases for me is, what would a successful outcome do for you? Now that's different than what does success look like, because now we're getting into the motivation. So let's think about this. You and I are working on a project and we ask each other this question. Well, what would a successful outcome do for you? I bet that's a mediation question
Yeah.
probably too, something
Yeah.
similar, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so I say, I got to be honest with you. I've worked 70 hours this week, and all I got to tell you is what a successful outcome looks like for me is that at Friday, I get home in time for my kids' Little League game.
Yeah.
And you say successful outcome looks like for me. I've been trying to convince my boss I'm really a good critical thinker on this topic. So in the meeting, can I have the microphone for a minute, and so that I can be the one sharing some of these outcomes work that we're doing? Now, if we hadn't asked that question, we have a shared understanding of success for this project, but there is a
Mm.
subtext that could lead to
Yeah.
conflict If you're like, oh, no big deal, I can work late on Friday, you sort of Chinese and we'll sit here and talk. And I'm like, I am actually a very articulate person. I should be the one that presents this in this meeting. And we are now in conflict. So that's clarity. So we got connection. Are we connected as human beings? Clarity. Do we have a shared understanding of success? And let's move to curiosity.
Yeah.
Be genuinely interested in one another's perspectives and what's possible. And, we say it's hard to be furious and curious at the same time. So if you're in conflict, if one of the first things you can do is say, hold, let me show up genuinely curious in the other person's perspective on this. And, what does this look like from your perspective? Good go. And to then stop and really listen. And when we ask that question, it's often very surprising what it looks like from the other person's perspective. And so you will see throughout the book, as you did, right, there are that we almost always have a curiosity phrase, no matter what acute conflict emergency ACE you're dealing with. And then filing is commitment. And this is, do we have a shared agreement? And the shared agreement, this is when you see conflicts that keep not resolving. Have this conflict conversation, we think we're in agreement, and then we leave. And then next Tuesday, we're in the same conflict again. Usually there was not a commitment conversation. So one of our favorite goats for that is, so what we've agreed to is this, and then you restate what you've agreed to. Let's schedule some time. We call this scheduling the finish, maybe like 3 weeks from now. And let's talk about this again to see how our solution is working. Now, if both of us have this on our calendar and we know we're going to have this conversation again, we're both more likely to meet our commitment and do what we said we're going to do, even if it's hard. And if we don't keep our commitment, neither one of us has to get the courage to start that conversation again because we've already scheduled it.
I was reading this that there's so much different theory underpinned here. So I love that furious and curious one. If you're curious, you can't be furious. I love that. And this is where if you have outcome focused conversations, that's where it's constructive. And this is where your language is really utilizing that non-violent communication where it's constructive. It's clean language. People are not getting triggered by that. And here's the thing, the commitment pieces, you can contract with each other then, is how do I have that difficult conversation with you? Commitment isn't met. How do we handle that? And that's that coaching piece there that I really loved about all of these questions. The conflict coaching, it's understanding that emotional intelligence. It gives people the language, the tools and techniques. So again, everything there. And this, when you mentioned goats, then goats are the greatest phrases of all time here for dealing with workplace conflict. And Seth Godin reckons just these alone is worth buying the book. So you went through some of them there. That's what we mean by goats, isn't it? Is those 12 kind of phrases that really goes through connection, clarity, curiosity, and commitment, isn't it?
So, one of the biggest objections, a book with this title, you could say, well, you can't script conflict, right? But so often people that we're working with, and I imagine this happens to you all the time too, just give me the words, tell me what to say. And so we wanted to give people, because there's over 300 powerful phrases in the book. And as you pointed out, it's a table of contents and go to where you need to go. But if you can get a few of these goats, the ones that resonate with you in your vocabulary, and it is so funny how since we've written this book, I find myself, I'm like, all right, just use a goat and see what happens here. And we picked these because they're so universal. And so, just one of our favorite for connection is just tell me more. So if somebody comes in fired up and they are upset and you say, oh, wow, it sounds like you're really upset. Can you tell me some more? Because the reason people get louder, either metaphorically or actually louder, is because they're not feeling heard. So if the first thing you say to them is, I am listening to you. In fact, I'm listening to you so much, I want to hear more. It immediately de-escalates the conversation.
Yeah. You actually cover that in the book. Is you cover, here are phrases to de-escalate emotional conflict. And this is why the book is so good. The thing when you talk about conflict then is a lot of people might avoid conflict, or they don't know how to bring it up, or it's Ireland, we've a bit of a passive aggressive culture. We'll tell you we're fine, but we're not. And if somebody tells you you're fine, that's the most dangerous thing you might have heard in
I'm
the
fine.
office that day. Yeah. So how do you do that with confidence? How do you bring up conflict when you're kind of going, I'm not too sure?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is the most important conversation you need to have when you're dealing with workplace conflict is the conversation that you're having with yourself.
Mm,
And to ask yourself a couple of these questions. Why does what you have to say matter? What's at stake if you feel silent? And then what's on the other side of that conversation? How will you feel when you've been heard? And I'll just share with you a quick example because this one just sticks in my mind about why it's so important to have the conversation. So it was right before the book was coming out. So we had in our email signatures, we had this picture of the book. It said available for pre-order now. And so we have a client, and once a quarter, I go to their offices, and I have a conference room, and anybody can come in, and we do coaching, and
yeah.
it's just really an open door thing so that they can have these private conversations. Well, this guy, he was in his 50s. He comes flailing through my door. He didn't even have an appointment, but he saw that it was empty, and he goes, Karen, I just got an email from David, and I saw that you have a new book coming out. Do you have a copy of that book in your purse? Because I need that book right now. And I was like, whoa. And so I
Yeah.
said, it's not out yet, but please sit down because I know what it says.
Yeah.
And let's see what's going on, you know? And he's like, oh my gosh, I have been in for 3 months, I am so fired up and angry about, and he tells me this person who, of course, I also know because this is my client. She's been through the leadership
Yeah.
programs. And I said, you both want exactly the same thing. And he goes, impossible. Passive aggressive, exactly the same thing. Trust me. She was in here earlier. You want exactly the same thing. He's like, how do you? I said, don't take my word for it. Go show up curious, ask her. And I gave him a couple of powerful phrases, a connection phrase I really care
Yeah.
about. And I didn't even
Yeah.
use each other because they're too far
Yeah.
apart. I really care about the success of
Yeah.
this thing they're working on. And then I gave them some curiosity phrases. I said, come back this afternoon and tell me how it went. He came back, completely different human being. And he's like, oh my gosh, you know what? We did want exactly the same thing. I'm like, right. And she really doesn't. She's not trying to destroy my career. I'm like, right. She's not.
Yeah.
And but they were attacking this thing from they were different departments, and they were attacking it from a very intense situation. He's like, I just wish I had had this conversation 3 months ago. I have
Yeah.
wasted so many dinner times, and my wife is sick of hearing about this,
Yeah.
and he's like, and I have lost sleep. Why didn't I
Yeah.
just do this sooner?
Yeah.
So remember that. So next time you do it sooner.
That's so common. The amount of experiences that I have had in global teams where, and especially because you were saying there, like some teams only spend an hour of a crossover or something like that together. A lot of times that connection can't happen, or the communication or clarity gets lost. And this is what I've noticed. And this is a true example where I had that question there, and you actually said it here is, what's at stake if I stay silent? I love that, because then you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? When I encourage um this person to speak to the other person, there was going to be a mediation to start, and they wanted to avoid that because they felt it was too formal. And when we went in, they went into the room the next time I did a group facilitation, the two men hugged, and it was such a powerful. They live in different countries, and we ended up in this place, and I thought it was the most powerful thing, where they both decided to take approach of curiosity there and really understand what is it going out for me, what's really important. And this is what happens is it unlocks your values a bit, like you were saying. It's really important for me to show up for my boss or to be visibility, is unless we start asking these questions, is what am I trying to protect, or what am I trying to defend? Then this is why we get stressed in conflict, isn't it?
It is. Oh, yeah. I've got a beautiful example. And
Yeah,
that makes
please
you feel
share.
really good too, right? Because
Yeah.
then you really help them.
Yeah, it's on page 43. So sometimes my guests like that, so they can buy the book and go straight to page 43. Invite others into conversation.
Yeah.
And I like this is like it's a bit like what you said before is I care too much about a relationship not to talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's a wonderful way to show people I care. This matters. This is a courageous conversation. And when we have those conversations, I think the other people will recognize this is difficult for you. You're putting yourself out there.
Yeah. And that is one that, works not just in the workplace too, right? I say that to my adult child, right? I care about you too much not to say this. Not trying to, there's no malice in this conversation. And I think when
Yeah.
you can start soft like that people
Yeah.
really, all the trust research, you have my best interest at heart is one of the questions that runs through all the research on trust. And that's
Yeah.
do you have I have your best interest at heart conversation.
And I think this is where sometimes us as coaches, facilitators, corporate trainers, is sometimes in that case, between your example that you used between the man and the woman there, it was sometimes it is someone who has no agenda, no skin in the game. They're going to go and think you have to say you're looking for the same thing. You've got a
Yeah.
lot more in common. People, that's where you have a trusted advisor there. In the office, then if we don't have that person there, this is where naming the elephant in the room takes a little bit of courage. But there's another good question you have is, I'm concerned that we might not be talking about ... And my hunch is because of this, here's what I think we need to have the conversation about. What do you think? Now, what I like that is that it's framed as an invitation, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
a permission-based, outcome-focused conversation to go, I just need to sense check this.
Absolutely. And so because it's inviting the conversation into the room. So we did work with Nestle in Switzerland, and I had not heard this phrase before. But sometimes you got to put the fish on the table. Yeah. And I mean, that's such a good image, right? You put the fish on the
Yeah.
table because the fish is, I mean, if you're going to put a fish on the table, it's probably a stinky fish at this point. And
Yeah.
we're going to talk about it. We call that the elephant in the room. We call that the diaper genie. I don't know if you have diaper genies over in Ireland, but it's a way to the poop and sandwich it in plastic so it doesn't smell, but of course the smell is still there. So yeah, that's having the but it's calling it out. Like, I think we're not talking about something, and the thing is, the other person knows you're not talking about it too, right?
Yeah.
So and you're gonna say, well, thanks for having the courage to bring that up, because I've been thinking it too, but I haven't so brought it up.
There's other questions then is, what are your biggest concerns for the next 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
So again, you're inviting them in, and without you actually saying anything, because sometimes it's hard to actually say it, because then you might be making an assumption or get it wrong, is by asking questions, and really good questions, which are direct and targeted to elicit what's going on for them. That's that coaching approach, which is so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes if you're working with a team, just do that in a visible anonymity. You can do that in an anonymous way. I was working with an executive team, and what they had brought in, they had brought people from all over. So it was like multiple brands coming together. They don't normally work together, but there was a strategic project that was going to be really critical to their future. So they brought in all the executives, and then as a developmental thing, they brought in the people who were in succession to potentially take over their jobs. Ultimately, which is great, but also tricky, because their politics in this room were as thick as I could see, as you've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
It's like they want to look good, and they're so you ever get that sense like nobody is talking about really what they're feeling about the project? So I called a timeout from the strategic planning conversation, and I gave everybody a Post-it note, just a little index card, because I happen to have them in my purse. And I said, we're going to take a break, but before we do, write your biggest hopes for this project on the front, and on the back, write your biggest fears. Right? Collected them. I came back, fascinating. Hopes, all the things we had all over the room, all this, everybody knew why we were there with the hopes for the project. But what was fascinating was the fears. I don't think my peers in this room are really committed. I think I'm the only one who's actually going to execute. I'm concerned that the only one who cares about this. Everybody had the same fear. Every single person in the room had the same fear. If we had spent 2 days building out a strategic plan for this thing and hadn't talked about that, it would have been a disaster and a waste of time.
Yeah.
So
amazing. So here's where I'm going to go to next then. And the reason I'm doing this is to promote this book. And the reason why is not only are you sharing your expertise, you're getting expertise from other people. So body language then is really important. So you can have all the words. It's how you deliver it, isn't it? So why is body language so important?
You are paying attention to all of how you're communicating. And I will never forget when David, who's my husband and co-author, and I first started working together, and we had merged together my organization, my business, doing this kind of work, and his business doing this kind of work. So two CEOs are now in a relationship, but B have a different, and we're like, so we go into this client, and I will, say it was my client to start with, right?
Okay, I hear
And
you.
we had agreed on an approach. Well, in that room, he did something that surprised me. And it wasn't what we had agreed on. And it wasn't necessarily wrong. It was just how he would have done it versus how I would have done it. But I was so angry. And he pulls me out of the room and he says, here's the thing. Because I had not said a word. But he's like, here's the thing. Look on your face. And the way you are looking at me right now is so bad. He's like, I agree. I screwed up. We're lead on this. I shouldn't have taken that in that direction. But you got to change your face because you're going to derail the credibility that we have with this client, right? And he was completely right. He was completely right. And since then, we've worked through how to work better together. I don't have a poker face. I have a very expressive face, but you need to be sensitive to what are the other areas of your body. Are you closed off? You're sitting there and you say, I really care about you and your career. And you're sitting there and you've got your hands crossed across your chest and you're leaning back in a self-protective mode. Nobody's going to buy it that you are interested in collaborating. And I think that's one of the hardest things. And that's why the Curious Furious thing matters so much. Because if you are really, really still angry and not curious, it's going to it's going to bleed out in your body in some way.
Yeah. I am consciously at this moment taking the expert insight from Hilary Blair. Now, people can't see what I was doing, but she gives us two pieces of advice from a body language perspective. Do you want to lead on this, the exhale and the relax your mouth?
Hillary is a really good friend of ours. She really does live it. That's the thing. So she has a theater background. And so she's all about getting into your body. And so she's like, all right, just center yourself, like exhale, right?
Yeah.
And then breathe out and then center. And it's true. I remember years and years ago, I was at Verizon. I was at Verizon for 20 years. I was executive and I wasn't a keynote speaker, but I was about to go speak to 2,000 people as an executive. And everything had gone wrong. The thing was in Washington, D.C. And then the valet wouldn't take my car and I was running late. And there was like a 2 hour, it should have taken 20 minutes to get there. And it had taken 2 hours to get there. And I was like panicked, but I also did yoga. So I remember I was racing in and the guy, I was like 1 minute before I was supposed to take the microphone. And I looked at him and I said, it's better for me to go on stage 2 minutes late than to go in this state. I said, just go warm them up. And then I just went and I just like centered myself and got in. So it's the same thing with conflict. You got to get back into your own body, even if it takes an extra minute.
I like the tip then about the tongue. To relax your mouth, to stay in listening mode, drop your tongue to the bottom of your mouth and slightly open your mouth. This relaxed position forces you to take a beat before you can respond and helps you maintain a listening posture. Hilary Blair, thank you so much for that. She's the CEO of Articulate, real and clear activator of communication. Love that. So that helps you with your body language as well, your facial expressions, all that, which is brilliant. One thing you mentioned before, and we talked about you working in global teams then, is competing goals. So we're in an organization, a hybrid organization, we're in a matrix organization. How do you handle competing goals? Because I had this during the week, by the way, and I had your book on hand, and I showed the person who was in this large organization this book, and I says, okay, here are some ways to navigate that. And a bit like what you said before, she was losing sleep and she was also had leaving intentions. Now, the organization is going to lose out, and clearly there's tension in several teams, not just one team. So competing goals, speak through this. What are the kind of phrases that we can have?
Yeah. So, I think that you need all of the dimensions in the competing goals. One of the
Yeah,
biggest challenges that we see with people with have competing goals is also they often don't know each other that well.
yeah,
So, on take a minute and understand who this person is as a human being. Brene Brown says it's hard to hate people up close, and I really believe that that is really true.
yeah,
And so I'm going to assume you make that connection. And then the clarity, what would a successful outcome do for you really can, because a lot of times when we have competing goals, it's it's about
yeah,
what part of what we're competing about, but we actually
yeah,
agree about a lot of other things. So let's start with what
yeah,
we agree on is a good, powerful phrase for that thing. This is where Ralph Kilman's work comes in too,
yeah.
because I asked him if we could call him the grandfather of conflict research, and he said yes, that was okay. He's reached a point in
Okay.
his life he's allowed to be the grandfather of conflict research. Right? He's done so much study, and what he says is you can't solve things interpersonally that are structural issues. That is really true. So part of it is this about you and me competing, or is
Yeah,
there something that is not? Like, do we need to escalate this and figure out, is there a different way that we should, are there systems and processes that need to be changed? So, assuming that either there aren't or you can't, and you still have competing goals, then one of the things that I think is just so really critical is to say who owns the decision on this. And I will tell you, even David and I have competing goals all the time because we care about different things in the business. I'm the CEO, I'm the marketing, I have big vision, and I move really fast. And
mm,
David is really concerned about operations and getting it right. And
yeah,
going fast and getting it right and high quality and
mm,
are often at conflict. So we have agreed that, and I really think this has been very important for our marriages. Okay, who owns the decision? And so we collaborate, really be curious about each other's points of view on things. But at the end of the day, we know that there are certain calls that I'm going to make and there are certain calls that he's going to make. And including there are some structural systems he's put into our organization that I don't love dealing with personally, and he knows it. But he's like, it's better for the long term viability. It's setting us up for growth.
mm,
The team loves it, Karen.
yeah,
So get over it.
yeah,
So, so that who owns the decision. And then I think to your point, you said this earlier, and then we talked. I wanted just to come back to what you said about how you talk about the conflicts before they happen, before
yeah,
you need to have them. And I think that is really important when you're dealing with these matrix teams or people with conflicting goals. Okay, if we are going to have to escalate, imagine we get to a time that we're going to have to escalate. How and when are we going to escalate?
yeah,
So now we're not in this passive aggressive, blind carbon copied emails to your
yeah.
boss, right? Because we've already agreed that if we can't agree on these competing goals, we're going to hold hands and we're going to go together and have this conversation with our boss so that the relationship stays intact, even though the goals are conflicting.
And this is where my path of study, a lot of people will know this from listening to the podcast, has gone in many different ways. And it's because I've always struggled with these issues. And if I can't understand, well, how can we be in a place to help others? And it is funny. Conversation we just had with me there was the exact same conversation I had with that other person only 3 days ago. And when you said structural, I says, well, this seems like an organizational design issue where the system is set up to compete with each other, or there's tensions there. And then who is the final decision maker, or what is the service level agreement between departments? If something needs to be escalated, how do we do that? So this is where we have intentionality built into the system to say, okay, who is the final decision maker, or how do we manage for actions not taken, or how do we manage for if there are different goals, what gets priority? And if we have clarity, then this will make it easier for people, that people are constantly not in their ego, or what gets rewarded, or I'm not going to hit my performance management goal.
Was not that great at dealing with conflict at one point in my career in
Mm,
particular. And I was leading a 2,200 person sales team that was the retail stores. So selling cell phones, but I had 110 retail stores.
mm,
Well, I had massive conflict with two of my peers. One who was selling the indirect stores. So these were stores that weren't the Verizon stores, but they were, let's call them knockoffs. But,
Okay.
but others, but and sometimes we shared a parking lot.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other person I had conflict was the B2B, because my team was super good. And a very courageous culture. We were really good at selling to small business. And I was stepping on her toes because I was selling to her customers from my store. And so but it was a structural issue. These two people were
Yeah.
fine human beings,
Mm,
but I was in conflict all day long. Our
yeah.
teams were in conflict all day long. And I wish I had this knowledge, this research back then, where we could have come together and we could have gone it to our boss and said,
Yeah.
like, this is an untenable situation. Why are we doing this? Why are we sharing a parking lot? That just doesn't make sense.
Reminds me then of something in the book. So earlier on, you were just talking about teams in conflict. And one of the things that happens quite often is accountability in teams and how to manage that and how to bring that up in a constructive way. So what you have the Inspire method, isn't it?
Yes. Wow, you really have read this book carefully.
Oh, I have.
Uh, Actually, the Inspire method is one of our most popular techniques that we teach in our long-term leadership development programs.
Yeah.
So we teach it for leaders. We teach it
Mm,
about how do you have an accountability conversation with your team. So it's Inspire is an acronym, but in the book, we talk about how you teach this method to everybody on your team, and anybody can have an Inspire conversation. And in fact, one of our clients actually printed this out on cards and they gave it to everybody. And they said, don't hide it. Like, take the card and say, put it on the desk in front of both of you and say, let's have an Inspire conversation. So yeah. What
brilliant.
is it? Yeah. Starts with the C's, right? But then it goes through, and Inspire is just a way to remember the steps.
Yeah.
It's with connection. And here you're going to connect to the human and you're going to connect to your intent for the conversation. So I initiate, hey, I've noticed, I the conversation. Hey, I really care about you. This, whatever it is that you care about, or like, do you have a minute for this
Yeah.
conversation? My intent for this conversation is this. So initiate the conversation. N is for notice and S is for support. We're very deliberate about using the word notice because you can't notice an attitude. You can only notice behavior. Now, you may say, yeah, of
Yeah.
course you can notice an attitude, but how would you describe it as a behavior? So
Yeah.
somebody is having a bad attitude in your coworkers having a bad attitude in your team meeting. What is it that you're seeing? Well, are they cutting people off? Are they saying that'll
Yeah.
never work? Right? What are they doing? And then S is you provide specific examples. So initiate the conversation, notice, S support evidence. But the real magic of the model is curiosity. So you're going to probe and invite. So P, probe. Hey, what's going on? What does this look like from your perspective? Why do you think this keeps happening? And then you're going to invite them to come up with the solution, right? So
Yeah.
what do you think you could do to show? Because I hear you don't mean to be unsupportive of your colleagues. What
Yeah.
do you think you could do in our meetings to show that you really
Yeah.
do are genuinely interested? And then you move to commitment. And then this is a review and enforce. So review, you're going to recap. Oh, so what I hear you saying is you're going to do this and enforce. So let's schedule some time to talk about this again. And of course, depending on if you're the boss, it's a lot easier to have
Yeah.
that conversation, but you can have it peer to peer, and you can also have it with your boss. Hey, I noticed that I didn't get the data that I need. In order for me to do the analysis, which is going to take me 4 hours, I really need to have this data on Tuesday. I've noticed that I've been getting it on Thursday, which really puts me on a crunch, and I don't feel like I have the time to do the quality job to get it to our key stakeholders.
Mm.
Now, I really care about you, and I want and this project, and I want to be successful. What do you think we could do to change our process in
Yeah.
order to make sure that I get the data in sufficient time to get it to our stakeholders? And so you're softening it a little bit, but you're still showing up curious with a probe and an invite.
That's where I think the book is so invaluable. There's, as I said, the key chapters here is rising above, tackling tricky workplace situations, right? Feeling invisible or ignored is another one. Um, expectations are clear. Your remote or hybrid team is in conflict, or a team that doesn't get along. Section 4 is managing up when you're feeling down. So how to deal with conflict with your boss, communicating with difficult people, lazy workers, know-it-all. So here, I was on recently with Elizabeth Moran, and we talked about her book, Leading Change. So this was a Emma that was posed to me by recently, so I might go through it with you if that's okay. And a lot of change management going on. We'll say it's a public sector employee who's not really implementing the change or being open to it, maybe resistant to it. That's where the Inspire method could really help if somebody was resistant to change, or kind of what's the resistance, or you
Yeah.
know, what might the options be if we don't see this? What like in 3 months' time if we have this conversation?
Yeah. There. This is not in the book, so you're getting bonus content here.
Okay. Oh wow.
But what you're now noticing is the pattern. So if somebody
Mm,
is resistant to change, what instead of noticing the what exactly they did, so
yeah.
instead of noticing a behavior, hey, I noticed that, you're noticing is, hey, what I have noticed is when we have these changes that come up, and then you observe, I see you do this thing, right? And I am really curious. And don't say you're resistant to change, because if you tell somebody
Yeah.
they're resistant to change, like it's like
Yeah.
telling somebody that,
Yeah.
they're anything negative, any label, you're
Yeah.
too negative.
Yeah.
But man, but I've noticed this. I've noticed you do this thing. And I'm curious, what does this look like from your perspective? What's on here? And get them to, and often people will say, yeah, well, a lot of things are moving really fast around here. And I'm heard, like, I like things, though it ain't broke. Don't, why
Yeah.
are we changing this thing? And now you're having the conversation about the change. By first showing up curious, it can make a difference. So we have the art model of escalating and inspire conversation. So the first time you're talking about the action, the behavior. The next time you're talking about the repetition, right?
Yeah.
But the third time you're talking about is a trust. So imagine that you've had a conversation and about a pattern, and the person says, yeah, you're right. Stop blocking this change. I'm committed. I'm going to be more on board. If we agree to something, if I totally, I'm not on board, but if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to follow through and do it. And I'm going to stop blocking it. The next change comes along and they're back to their same behaviors. Well, instead of focusing on the behavior, hey, I noticed you ignored all the emails and just sat on them and didn't do anything with it, which is the behavior potentially. You're not talking about the pattern, like that they've done that same pattern
Yeah.
before. This time you're saying, hey, they're like, well, yeah, I'm really busy, I need
Mm,
to forget it. And you're like, I'm not talking about the emails. What I'm talking about here is in this relationship, we've got to be able to trust one another. And 3 weeks ago, you said, you know what? I'm gonna do this
yeah.
differently. And now you're not doing it differently. What's going on? And that's generally in that conversation, then you're going to get to a deeper conversation of, maybe this isn't the right job for me, or I just, this is a values clash at stake here. So now you're able to have this deeper conversation. I will give David credit for this one. He says, don't get mad, get sad. And he's so good at it. Versus being, so you, in that conversation, you're showing up disappointed, but
Yeah.
you're not, because if you
Yeah.
escalate your voice and tone and body language, they're going to
Yeah.
escalate their tone and voice and body
Yeah.
language.
Guest on before, and she talked about the Hardy is her name, and she spoke about the difference between melodrama and tragedy. A
Ooh.
really interesting frame where you're caught in the drama of it, saying it's a tragedy. What has led this person to taking this position? And I think it's such a wonderful frame, and especially when you talk about the curiosity, then it really, that instead of being mad, be sad. It's like, okay, I'm disappointed here, and then it allows them that not to be threatened by you when you're mad. It's like, okay, what's going on here? So just a little bit about that. But then this is what kept me up of a question. There's a final question, because you talk about chronic complainer, or a moody Michael that I call them, right? A bit like you said before, when they really want to complain, you say, "Tell me more." And this is what kept me up: is are we rewarding that behavior of constantly doing that over and over again, or is there a boundary? Because there's some people listening in here say, if I had to listen more and more to a chronic complainer, I'd be kind of going, oh, come on, hold on here. No, I'm exhausted listening to you.
Yeah, there's two kinds of chronic complainers. There's the ones that just really rare, right? And to that, then you gotta get how do you channel that and notice how that it. And then you've got the people who are just chronic complainers. They could be getting their hands massaged with coconut oil on a beach, and they chose the coconut oil. And somebody said, and they're like, "This smells like coconut. Like, why does this smell like coconut?" Right? So. I think you hear your point. An inspired conversation would work great here. We were just talking about that. I've noticed, and then get them to be focused on the solution. So don't just keep taking their complaints and you solving it. Move it back to them. All right, what do you suggest we do here? Like we've talked about that. You've been talking about these issues, or I've noticed that you brought me 18 issues. Which of these is the most important to you? Because we're not going to solve all this stuff. But if you had to pick one that is really here, what would it be? And then say, okay, so what do you suggest we do about that thing? And if you push it back on them, then they're less likely to keep bringing you things because they don't want a bunch of extra work too.
Karen, I can see why Inc. magazine have you as one of the great leadership speakers. We're coming to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for your generous time. If people were to find out more about you and about your book and about your company and your vlog, how might they do so?
Okay, so it's letsgrowleaders.com is our website. And we are offering so much free content there. We write a pretty robust article every week. David has a podcast too called Leadership Without Losing Your Soul. I have my vlog, which is called Asking for a Friend, which I take questions that have come up in my travels from people and I give really practical answers to them. So letsgrowleaders.com is the best way. The book is available everywhere that books are sold. But here's the thing I would offer to your listeners. We have built a companion guide that is completely free. You can go to the QR code in the book, but you can also download it from our website. And it has discussion questions and tools and templates and build your own goat or conflict cocktail activities. Lots of ways that you can read the book together. I'm looking for an inexpensive way to really have the conversation about conflict before you need to have the conversation and you want to talk about how are we going to do conflict as a team. I would definitely recommend that you download that free resource.
Karen, thank you so much for your time today. I have to say, I really enjoyed it.
Me too. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the reading and all of the beautiful work that you do and everything you do to encourage courage. It sounds to me like we are definitely kindred spirits, and I'm glad that we have discovered one another in this world.
Me too.
Thanks for listening to the Workplace Podcast with your host, William Corless. Our special thanks to this episode's guest for sharing their expertise with us. If you found this episode valuable, please rate and review it. For updates on future episodes and to get in contact with us about any workplace topics, please follow Yellowwood on LinkedIn and Twitter at Different Paths. As always, you can head over to yellowwood.ie for any other information. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner, provider of executive coaching, facilitation and training. Take a different path to success with your career, leadership, team and organisation.